Hey there everybody, Mr. J here, and today this will be kind of a fun video. I'm going to show you how aldosterone and ADH both work on the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct of the nephron, which is found at the last tail end of the nephron, and how it helps, if it's aldosterone, to reabsorb sodium and chloride, and therefore water will follow that, so it reabsorbs all three of these things. And then I'll talk about ADH, which is called antidiuretic hormone, otherwise known as vasopressin, and how it acts to just increase water reabsorption through the increase of aquaporins. So let's get started. First off, aldosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone that is released when the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is activated, usually because the kidneys notice that there is a decrease in blood pressure. When there's a decrease in blood pressure, the kidneys don't like that because the kidneys have to keep a constant filtration rate of around 120 milliliters of filtrate per minute. So once this number drops because the decrease in blood pressure, the kidneys will actually produce a hormone called renin. Okay, it'll go through this whole cascade of processes and thus secrete aldosterone. Aldosterone is another hormone that will travel in the bloodstream, and then it will go and act on the tubular cells of the nephron, specifically in the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, so I'm going to draw some aldosterone in this bloodstream. In aldosterone, usually if it ends in O-N-E, that means it's a steroid hormone. That means that it's lipid soluble, so it can actually pass through the cell membrane and get into the tubular cell of the kidney. So once aldosterone's in here, it will bind to receptors in the nucleus. Now what's interesting about this is once it gets to the nucleus, it increases the process of protein synthesis. Okay, so proteins build the cells. They're in the membranes, they're in the cells themselves, but specifically aldosterone will increase the protein synthesis of different sodium pumps. So if it's increasing the amount of sodium pumps, these sodium pumps will actually go to the membrane, specifically the basal side, the basilar membrane of this tubular cell, and it will increase the pumping of sodium out into the bloodstream. Now there will be other symport proteins that will be present, okay, and it'll allow for chlorine to get back into it so that therefore you have sodium chloride, right? So what aldosterone did, it increased protein synthesis by changing the DNA transcription translation, increase the protein synthesis, the protein being the sodium pumps, pumping sodium out, chlorine follows that, so we got salt reabsorbed, but I also said it helps increase the reabsorption of water as well. Now, how does it do that? Well, in reality, these tubular cells will be pretty full of these little water holes. These water holes are called aquaporins. Aquaporins. Okay? If you read the word here, aqua meaning water, pore meaning a hole, and IN being a protein. It's a water hole protein. So it allows water, because we know water likes to follow salt, it allows water that's in the filtrate to pass through all the way through this cell, down its concentration gradient, into the saltier bloodstream. So therefore, why did we do this in the first place? Well, I told you that blood pressure was decreased, usually because of a decrease in blood volume. So our filtration rate went down. So we needed to bump that blood volume, bump that blood pressure back up. Well, what happens once you secrete aldosterone, it has its effect. We are increasing sodium chloride and water in the bloodstream. What will that do to your blood volume? It will increase your blood volume. If increase of blood volume will also cause an increase of blood pressure, and therefore this established homeostatic value of 120 milliliters a minute of filtrate being filtered every minute will be reestablished. Okay, so that is aldosterone. Awesome. Now let's move into antidiuretic hormone, otherwise known as vasopressin. Now, vasopressin, this is a hormone released by the posterior pituitary in response to high osmolarities in the blood. Okay, so first off, in the bloodstream, the osmolarity, the concentration of stuff is usually around 290 milliosmoles. Sometimes, if you increase your blood concentration of solutes, it can go up to something like 300 milliosmoles. This can occur when you eat super salty foods, perhaps, so your osmolarity goes up. So what we need to do is reabsorb water so that we can dilute out all this solute and get it back to that solute concentration of about 290 milliosmoles in your bloodstream. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, vasopressin, I told you, is released by the posterior pituitary in response to these high osmolarity levels in our blood. Okay, so what will happen is this hormone, it's a protein hormone this time, so a peptide hormone, it's going to travel in the bloodstream just fine, but protein hormones are not lipid soluble. They're hydrophilic, okay? So they like water. They don't like fatty stuff. So interestingly, they cannot pass through this cell membrane. So you ask, how do they make the effect? Well, there's going to be a G protein coupled receptor found in the membrane of this cell, okay? So this hormone, ADH, will bind to this receptor. And this G protein coupled receptor will make a conformational change. It'll do a whole lot of stuff and increase specifically cyclic AMP. You don't need to know this for my class, but eventually that cyclic AMP likes to help move things. Well, what does it like to help move? It will help to move these pre-existing vesicles that contain a protein we've already talked about. What protein does this look like? Well, it looks like these aquaporins that I drew up here, doesn't it? So we've got aquaporins already prepared within the cell. We just need to get them to the membrane. So once this binds, once vasopressin binds, increases cyclic AMP, now it's going to push these vesicles that are pre-existing to both sides of this membrane. So we're going to basically chock this membrane full of aquaporins. And as we remember, aquaporins allow water to pass through. Okay, so water will be in this tubule lumen here. So this is the filtrate still, the stuff we're filtering. We need to reabsorb some of the water that's found in this filtrate. So what do? Well, we increase the water holes on both sides so that water can move through the cell and back into the bloodstream. Now the question is, why does the water want to move this direction? Well, I drew over here, this is in the collecting duct and also the distal convoluted tubule, but mostly in the collecting duct. As you move down the collecting duct, you can see in the nephron up here, as you move down, interestingly, the solute concentration in the interstitial fluid will increase. So in other words, out here in the bloodstream, it'll become more and more and more salty. Well, since we have a salty area here lower, water will want to pass through from low salt concentrations in the filtrate to high concentrations in this bloodstream and the medulla. So water will just passively diffuse through the aquaporins that we pushed out to the membranes back into the bloodstream. Once we do that, once we bring this water back into the bloodstream, well, that's going to fix our solution, right? We had too salty of blood. So now this number will go back to the homeostatic variable by diluting out the solute, by reabsorbing only water, and bring it back down to that 290 milliosmoles. At that point, vasopressin will stop being produced by the posterior pituitary and homeostasis is restored. Thank you for watching. Hopefully that was helpful.